Going live. Hello, friends. The KetoND, Dr. G here on a afternoon that's dark, as it's being that we've adjusted the clocks and it's in the northwest in the fall. It's getting late fall, actually mid fall. Up here we start fall much earlier, so just the further north you are, that's what happens. Our seasons come on quick. So this video is not about the seasons, although indirectly, so I'll come back to that. What I want to talk about is a topic that I do talk a lot about, and that's with fat intake and dietary optimization for us as human beings. And lately, a couple of things I've come across that have just raised my thinking again and taken me back a little bit about where we've come in terms of understanding in science and in human nutrition and what's optimum for health. And it seems like it doesn't matter how much time goes by, we're still dealing with the same kind of polarizing controversies, and that's namely the low-fat versus high-fat diets. And kind of mixed in with that lately has been a return to, not a return, but an awareness has come across my desk about the vegan philosophy and what that means, and what, is that health promoting? Veganism versus the keto diet, two kind of opposites in a way. You can be a vegan and be on a keto diet, so I want to kind of talk about two main areas. One is fat intake versus, so high fat diet versus low fat diet, and vegan versus animal-based diets. And so they aren't the same topics, but I'm going to mix the two a little bit here. And let me give you a little bit of background on my story. So I think I can talk with some authority around this for a number of reasons. Number one, okay, I'm a doctor. By the way, though, as I'll point out, it depends. Doctors are trained of all sorts. Medical doctors don't get a lot of nutritional training, by the way. And I'm a naturopathic doctor, licensed. I went to a 4-year medical school for that. And I suppose this video is not supposed to be about comparing physicians, but I just wanted to say that, we get as much and more in alternative medicine, but we still go through the basic sciences, etc. I don't study pharmacology as much because I don't prescribe many medications, but I had to go through those same courses in medical school, and I do write prescriptions, and those that I do work with, I understand them and what's appropriate. But with nutrition, I have a background as having a bachelor's of science in nutrition, so 4-year degree plus my doctorate, another 4 years. And now, with all that said, my knowledge of nutrition probably comes from my own searching and study. In school, we're told what is currently popular and widely accepted. And I went to a university where we were introduced to more, I think, on the topic. But it was really my own study of it going way back 20 plus years ago. So, you can only read so many opinions before you need to actually go in and look at the original research and get some critical analyses of what it says and what it doesn't say. And a lot of times in public opinion and nutrition science, and what we want the public to know from our government and those health promoters, is actually not based on sound science. They will do studies and you'll get some concepts, but a lot of times there's a big leap in terms of what we recommend people actually do. So I got a little distracted on the whole medical degrees and stuff like that, but my interest in nutrition goes way back till I was young. I was just interested in it, and I was thinking about what I ate and how it might impact me. I inherently knew that eating white sugar and processed junk food wasn't good for you. My mother told me that, and my dad. But, so I started to study this way back when. So I lived through the 90s. In my early 20s, I was on a low-fat, and then it became nearly a non-fat diet, as that was being promoted as healthy. So why not? And it was practically vegan, by the way. I had cut out most, if not all, dairy, and I was eating no red meat. So I would probably occasionally have a little bit of chicken and eggs, but it was essentially a low-fat, very low-fat diet, and practically vegan at times. And so probably for almost a decade, that's how I ate. I was extremely active. I'd started cycling, and I shouldn't say extremely. I was an amateur cyclist, and I worked full-time, and actually felt great, you know. I remember there were seasons of just where, hey, I wasn't getting sick anymore. But anyway, I experienced that. And then into my later life, I began to continue to study the topic. And, you know, over time, I realized that fats provided a lot of healthy benefits as I studied fat-soluble vitamins and the nutrients that move through the foods we eat into our bodies when they're combined with fats. Just as an example, I remember when studying carotenoids, those are the colored pigments that are in a lot of foods like carrots and beets and other leafy greens. And carotenoids are really anti-cancer. They're very helpful. They provide a precursor to vitamin A, and they're essential for things like vision and for cellular healing and repair. But most carotenoids, well, all by nature, carotenoids require fat for absorption. And so if you're on a very strict low-fat diet, you will not absorb your carotenoids very efficiently. You know, your body attempts to get it in, but it's a lot harder. Anyway, so over the years, I, in my nutrition training, was exposed pretty early to the philosophies of those like Weston A. Price and Royal Lee, the Weston A. Price Foundation, and books like Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, the work of Mary Enig on fat. You know, if you're not aware of some of this that I've just mentioned, the sources of that, I would highly recommend you go online and just kind of check out, you know, the Weston A. Price Foundation is a great resource where they demonstrate the traditional eating patterns of human beings and the many health benefits that are there. Pardon that call coming in. Nourishing Traditions actually is a great book in that it's a cookbook and also a nutritional resource in terms of facts and information. And so I'll link that in the notes below. So as I entered into my formal training, I've always kind of advocated for what I would call a whole foods diet. You know, I grew up in California, and I went through the whole non-fat phase and the all of that, and amongst all of my time with diets, I inherently knew that a plant-based diet made a lot of sense. You know, as humans, we have the ability to eat a lot of variety of foods. The argument can be made, well, we're omnivores. We know that, you know, humans have adapted to certain areas on the planet, and we've used animals as food, and we use plants as food. And Sally Fallon in Nourishing Traditions makes a lot of point around the whole ideas of plant-based foods have some inherent problems that we need to be aware of, but they're important. So it's not all or nothing, or, you know, it's not animal foods versus plant foods. It really should be what's the best foods for you, and that's tricky sometimes to figure that out. And one of the things I know is that we all need to limit junk food and try to eat a whole foods diet. Whole foods diet has been an overused term, especially after the grocery store chain came out. Whole foods, in my opinion, just simply means we're eating foods as little processed as possible in their natural form, but that processing is sometimes essential. You know, we don't have to necessarily be just pulling things out of the ground and putting them in our mouths. We need to prepare them. You know, cooking sometimes enhances the nutritional value of food. Cultures learn to ferment food to make it more digestible. Plant foods inherently require more processing, but we don't want to process it into what we see on our grocery store shelves like Fruit Loops and Lucky Charms. I mean, there are just shelves and shelves of processed foods. We know that they are denatured. They've lost a lot of the nutrient value, and it's pure calories and sugar at that that for that matter. And so, whole foods to me is trying to eat, you know, seasonally, with what's locally available and what resonates with your body in an imbalanced way. We use our brains to study what we do know, so the science is important, but there's also common sense in looking to the traditions of the past. And fortunately, we're now to the day when, I mean, we're going to reach where it was 100 years ago when we started this low-fat idea. And it's so ingrained in us that low-fat is healthy, not fat is bad, right? And mixed in that now is this animal products are bad as well. So the reason this topic came up recently with me was two things. One is that the documentary, which has been out a while now, it's called Forks Over Knives, 2011, I think it came out. A number of people recently brought this back up to my attention. You know, patients mention it just in passing, and friends and all that. And people often will come across it. Now, I use the term documentary loosely because, in my opinion, many documentaries are more of a propaganda piece in terms of they have an ideal, a philosophy that they want to sway public opinion on. And maybe it's a very, idealistic, it's a, so the idea, I think, of Forks Over Knives and the goal of those producers is to raise awareness, help people be healthy, and to save the planet. I mean, that's very altruistic. And my problem with it is that they make the leap away from science and from what I think is actually factually true to get people to think that animal foods are bad, inherently evil. We vilify them, and they make the case in many cases, and in most of it, it's very exaggerated in terms of the benefits and even to the environment. So, and people go on, especially low-fat diets and especially vegan diets. Many people inherently begin to eat more volume of foods that are imported. That's been demonstrated. And so in America, imported foods and elsewhere, the importation of foods is a major impact on the environment, whether it's meat or vegetables, fruits, etc. And I think less meat and animal products is imported into the U.S. as are plant-based foods. And these are getting shipped across. I've read in a statistic that the decrease in greenhouse gases from going to a vegan diet for one person is the equivalent of a transatlantic flight on an airline. So in 1 year, if you cut out animal products, you are saving enough and greenhouse gases. I won't get all into that, but you're basically reducing your carbon footprint by the same amount as taking a international flight. Now, that's a lot of energy. There's a lot of potential concerns to think about with that. But when you think about, us, as we like to vacation, and, many of us might do that a few times a year, every time you get in your car at a convenience to go somewhere, or you're taking your vacation, these are all impacting. And the other thing that they don't take into account, of course, is the importation of a lot of these plant-based foods. They're assuming more of a local, if we're locally producing our foods, then eating more plant-based foods are going to be less producing of greenhouse gases and CO2 than, eating meats. I think I said that correctly, eating, meat. So there's no, it's pretty clear that obviously the higher animal up the food chain and how it's produced, and honestly, if you are eating locally, you are reducing your impact overall in so many beneficial ways. There's a lot of evidence that animal foods actually are essential. I mean, that's why look at nature. We have carnivores, we have an animal food chain. It's the overconsumption and the lack of plant foods in the American diet that I think is a problem. And not lack of plant foods, I should say, in the healthy, nutritional vegetables, right? Let's just cut right to it. Yeah, fruits, not really. I mean, it's really about the vegetables and the content of the nutrients we're getting there. And so I digressed a little bit, but I wanted to just point out in that, yes, we need more plant foods, but if you are getting more of a high plant food eater, and you need to look at that nutrition even more. And food processing is going to remove and denature a lot of it that you're probably consuming. Check out, that Nourishing Traditions book. She points out how a very high grain-based diet inhibits a lot of nutrient absorptions, and in my opinion, as I've seen, it creates things like leaky gut and dysbiosis and imbalance in the microorganisms of the gut, and frankly too much sugar, because grains are a little treasure trove of sugar in tiny packages in the form of starch. Anyway, so anyway, the whole cholesterol thing, you know, there was research done. Most research on diet has been done through epidemiological like studies and observations and diet diarrhea, and looking at populations who have lower risks. You know, things like, in fact, one of the doctors they reference in the Forks Over Knives is T. Colin Campbell. I think he was involved heavily with that, and I believe he's the same guy that did the China study. I'm pretty sure he was. The China study's been kind of debunked, and fortunately there's some research done, observational, and they track and they do this data, and then it's jumping to conclusions that the data doesn't actually support. And so the idea that if in China people are healthier until they adopt a Western diet, that, oh, by the way, it happens to have more animal products from McDonald's, let's say, then we see them getting sicker, and so we say, oh, well, their natural diet must be better. Now, how they jump to veganism, that's another matter, because I have visited China and I know they're not vegans. They might eat, and probably do eat, more vegetables than some of us, but they eat lots of funny and interesting critters and animals and stuff, and it's kind of cool, actually. But I think we should eat more than just beef and the typical animal-based foods we eat, but Americans like consistency and not as much diversity. But there's a ton of fallacies that this Forks Over Knives does, as well as it's the same mistakes that were made when Ansel Keys, back in the 1950s, he's the one that, he was a doctor who advocated for the low, or that cholesterol and saturated fat cause heart disease. Those conclusions have largely been debunked, and yet it still sticks with us. And you still have doctors telling people, oh, you must lower your cholesterol, you must avoid eating cholesterol, and saturated fat is bad. That leads me to this book I wanna mention as well. So I mentioned Nourishing Traditions. Let's see if I can flip this around just really quick here. Apologize, I'm doing the handhold method here, but this is The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Ticoltz. I did reference this book already in one of my last videos. Here is the Nourishing Traditions. Great book. But in The Big Fat Surprise, she documents this whole fat craze, the anti-fat movement that occurred over the last 50 plus years. What's concerning to me, and a lot of it that I already knew, but when she talked about how I've been watching the nutritional recommendations over the last, it's getting close to 20 years now, and everything moved from the animal-based saturated fats and cholesterol to using processed margarine and the chemically laden soybean oil and the hydrogenated oils that are as well. Same deal. We had decades of where they were promoted and used by industry, and oh, guess what? Turns out that's actually been leading to heart disease. Turns out that then they started to, okay, so we can't use saturated fat, we can't use animal fats, we can't use hydrogenated fats. Then they started using these other concocted vegetable oils, and still today on our shelves and in most processed foods are highly toxic fats. So when we talk about, and when I talk about a high-fat diet, I'm talking about natural, healthy fats that occur in nature, not fried foods, unfortunately, unless you're doing it at home. Most fast food restaurants and even restaurants and stuff on the shelves, they're using oils, and that won't tell you this on the label all the time, but they process oils in such a way to make it pleasant and easy to use and to work with. And there's definitely these novel compounds that are being generated from that. And so, look up disease rates and the consumption of French fries and you'll see what I mean. But anyway, The Big Fat Surprise, it's not just a document. I mean, really, that's a documentary on where we've come with science and the lack of science that's really behind a lot of the recommendations. And her point is the evidence has been mounting for over 100 years in terms of the health aspects of using fats for our benefit. So, highly recommend that book. I won't go into it too much, I guess, but, probably the leading guru on the low-fat diet for heart health especially is Dean Ornish, who he has a lot to offer and tremendous amount of information. He has an active website. It's being run by his organization, and I think I want to conclude by just making a point. His holistic approach, I probably share more in common with than I disagree, but fundamentally they still hold on to that low fat, calories less than 10%, and they emphasize no animal products. I have a problem with that based on health. I mean, honestly, having done all that, I think sustainability to be able to live that way and deprive yourself of those essential fatty acids, hello. Inherently, if you're not getting some calories from fats sufficiently, where do you make up the caloric difference? Well, carbohydrates, right? Especially when you say don't eat animal products, you won't be getting much meat, and protein. And get enough protein from beans and legumes and grains. Yes, you can get, in theory, complete proteins by eating a very diverse diet, but that assumes you have robust digestion and you're processing and preparing your foods in the right way to allow those amino acids to actually get in and get utilized. That's not happening very often. And a lot of people find a vegan or a Ornish style diet to be very therapeutic. I have as well. I still use it when I'm doing a detox. Anyway, but B12, iron, protein issues, there's a lot of nutrients that you're not going to get out of a solely plant-based diet very efficiently. And I could go on and on. And so, but let's find common ground. So I love aspects of vegan diet. We need to eat more vegetables, but let's not vilify these categories of naturally occurring foods that were designed and made for man to eat and enjoy. We don't need to eat a giant steak every night. And we're talking about small amounts. That's the thing. We need to stop consuming so much excess. You know, I don't think Costco and cheap food in America is helping anyone. Subsidies to corn, subsidies, all this stuff that's spiked with sugar, and the abundance for cheap, high sugar foods is what's ruining our health. But beware, as being a high-fat diet advocate, I'd say beware of the processed vegetable oils. It's showing up all over. So I'll wrap this up pretty quick. I was going to review some products and talk about low or high-fat bars and stuff. I've done this before, but I've got the new keto bar from Designs for Health. I had high hopes for it. I did taste it, but I'm not going to consume this for two reasons. And as other companies are doing this, and that is, number one, is the cost. This is over $3 a bar, you know, and about over a third of it by volume is that sweetener called allulose, which provides no nutritional benefit at all. So yes, it's maybe not toxic like some of the others we know of, NutraSweet and aspartame. However, why not just eat food? You know, so my hack for avoiding these bars is actually to buy peanut butter and nut butters. Now, some people might have sensitivity to certain kinds of nuts and seeds. I alternate between, you know, macadamia and cashew butter, peanut butter, and it's just one potential snack. But I mean, the cost is significantly less, and then the nutrition is simple, is nearly the same, but with a fraction of the cost. Now I do supplement. I have and I'll put at some point in the description some of my recipes that I do. I love to take nut butter and mix in a few superfoods, ingredients that actually turn it into what tastes like some of these fancy bars that are loaded with things that I don't want. And it's, again, still a fraction of the cost. So, and then I've got my little grab and go container with my mix of nut butter surprise. Anyway, but yeah, I eat lots of vegetables in the meantime. So I'm going to wrap this up. If you have an opinion about veganism, I certainly respect all perspectives and the idea of those who aren't comfortable with eating animals, that, you know, and everything we do and eat has an impact on the environment. You know, I say just awareness is a good idea. And the more we can eat locally and know where our food's coming from, the better we are. And then I would close by saying, just exercise critical thinking skills. I'm going to put the review of Forks Over Knives in the comments below. And don't believe everything you hear and see and read, and including me. You know, look at the sources. You just have to make your own opinion. The other thing is use yourself as an experiment on you, and see what works. If you're not consistently getting healthier or maintaining a weight that is you feel good about, there's something wrong with the diets you've been trying. And so you need a diet. The right diet for you is one that you can sustain for the rest of your life. And you know, it's one that's going to hopefully produce health in the meantime. But try hard and quit, you know, try harder, quit again, and keep, you know, this yo-yo stuff, that's worse, you know. And I think it's this extremism between saying, oh, all animal foods are bad or all fat is bad. This is what I think breeds some of the manicness that we have when we approach diet. So, long video, meant to be shorter, but I appreciate you watching it, and comments, always let me know down below. It does help to get thumbs up, because that means more people will tune in and find this on YouTube. Certainly sharing it as well. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.